Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, in the spirit of the new Lenten season, Louisiana will likely face some tough choices as the legislature begins a 3-week special session to face a grave budget problem. We will look at the problems and the alternative. We'll also discuss who will be in charge in this first session under a new governor. And we will look at City Hall, where there has been an agreement on a new parking rate plan, and where the mayor will soon be sending a crime-fighting tax proposal to the voters. New Hampshire voters went to the polls last Tuesday. We'll discuss the influence that their presidential contest may have on the Louisiana primary. And we'll also look back at the passing Mardi Gras, where the city seems to be getting good marks for sanitation and safety. On the march for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Jeremy Alford, publisher, LaPolitics.com. Jessica Williams, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate. And Stephanie Grace, columnist, The New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to toss it on over to Jeremy first. We have a special session. We had a governor talking to the state, which was really sort of unprecedented. It's like, where do we begin with this? There's so much to talk about. Special session begins
on Sunday afternoon.
That's because we have a serious budget problem, which is what we heard from our governor in the special address to the state yesterday. What is he telling us?
Look, these are strange times, and it's only going to get weirder, and I know a lot of us love it when it gets weird, but we're talking about really weird. The session, technically it starts Sunday afternoon, but really the action starts Saturday afternoon, 2:30. That's when the governor unveils his budget proposal. In his speech last night, we mostly heard about the current fiscal year budget shortfall. It's somewhere in between $850 million to $940 million. The governor is going with the latter, the higher end on that number. The governor has proposed increasing taxes to cover half of that, and the other half will be covered by $160 million in cuts, moving money out of the rainy day fund, which is kind of the state savings account, and taking some of the BP oil money and redirecting it. The governor is holding the line, he told me, at $160 million in cuts for this fiscal year. Republicans are going to want significantly more. That's somewhere they're going to have to figure out a middle ground. Now, we heard all these horror stories from, that LSU football's going to be no longer, that safety net hospitals are going to close their doors, that TOPS is being pulled out from students. And look, really it's just all part of a larger narrative to scare people, to get them to lean on their lawmakers. And you know what? It worked. I mean, if the governor was looking for a sacred cow last night, he found it with TOPS. I was talking to lawmakers late into the night. All of them were telling me that they saw record numbers of engagement on social media. Text messages were blowing up, emails, phone calls throughout the day. Parents are worried, and we saw the governor kind of back away from that statement today in a press release, saying that, look, students who have TOPS right now are fine. They'll get to finish the semester out. It's next semester that we're worried about. TOPS will only be funded up to about 25%. Less lawmakers try to come up with the money. Nobody is talking about getting rid of TOPS. No one is talking about dismantling TOPS. We'll probably see some reforms. But tomorrow, Saturday, we're talking about a whole new set of horror stories. That's when we're going to learn about the more than $2 billion budget shortfall for next fiscal year that begins on July 1st. I asked the governor and the commissioner of administration, why, when these cuts come down, is LSU getting priority over, say, the Office of Motor Vehicles? And they said, wait till Saturday. I asked them, well, how much cuts will be in the budget for next fiscal year? They said, wait till Saturday. So we're going to start all over tomorrow with a new set of horror stories. And, that's the way the budget's going to start. Lawmakers are going to have to find a way to fill those holes throughout the special session. They only have 3.5 weeks to do it. These are uncharted waters, a Republican-led House, Democratic administration. All of it points to gridlock, but if we know anything, it's that lawmakers will get nothing done if it weren't for the last minute.
Where to start in following up questions to you? Okay, let's take a look now. First, for the this fiscal year, what's the matters that are going to be taken up in the special session? The call for the special session is not as broad as what the Republicans wanted to see. So, what exactly is the call for the special session? What can they deal with?
I mean, it's very heavy on taxes. It's that there were hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes temporary passed last year, 2015. We're looking at John Bell Edwards is looking at trying to make those either permanent or increasing them. Looking at adding a penny temporarily. We don't know what that means, but temporarily to the 4-cent sales tax. Increasing cigarette tax, for which there's already a bill filed for that. Taxes on cigarettes, taxes on booze. Restructuring the personal and corporate income tax brackets. If you pay taxes, if your business pays taxes in Louisiana, if everything in the governor's agenda passes, you will be paying more in taxes. John Kennedy alleged in his official Republican response to the speech last night that this is the largest tax increase in Louisiana history. I was able to pull Commissioner of Administration Jay Darden aside one-on-one last night and asked him, look, is that an honest depiction of this tax proposal? And he looked at me and he said, I don't know. He said, but there's no denying that it will be significant. And we know at least $500 million are on the table right now, and they're going to have to fill a nearly $2 billion hole next year. So, I mean, this could be a very large package of taxes.
And there is some talk in the call of doing some other things, such as getting rid of some dedications, getting rid of contracts. You know, some of the things the Republicans want to do are in there as options.
Right, but they asked for sentencing reforms. Yeah. They asked to look at state pensions. Medicaid reform, and they did not get those 3 items. But mostly the Republican strategy, and look, Republicans are intent to have their own plan by this weekend. They've formed a Republican study group that's been working, and they're going to meet again early next week. But the strategy for Republicans right off the bat is to look at cutting spending reforms. Once they have that, they're going to look at money that should be coming in, that they think should be coming in. Money, new fines from the Office of Motor Vehicle, the tax changes that were implemented last year. There are a few other things. The administration says they've taken that into consideration. Republicans say, well, we don't think you have.
And this is House Republicans leading
House
this?
Republicans.
Okay.
And then finally, lastly, to look at raising revenue. But look, you know, even the president of the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry is saying taxes are inevitable this session. The question is, by how much, how do you do it, and in addition to what other reforms?
And the rhetoric has become so partisan. I mean, this is kind of a carryover, from the fight for Speaker of the House, I think. Even last night, you had the Democratic governor addressing the state from his office. You had a Republican response. Like Jeremy said, I mean, we don't have things like that here in Louisiana. You have them in Washington. But the rhetoric is very much, you know, tax and spend versus holding the line. You know, I think this is just really a step towards this idea that we are becoming more partisan.
But I think taxes and spending, that's what we need to be talking about.
Yeah.
We don't need to be talking about tops and SEC football.
SEC football, yes.
And these are all, I think a lot of these messages were carefully orchestrated. And I mean, I don't think it does anyone any service to get tied up on these issues.
The governor threw out a line about about football possibly being cut. What he meant was, if we can't pay teachers, then students will get incompletes and they won't be eligible. But that whole issue is blown up in sports circles now.
But it's making people pay attention, isn't it?
It is.
Errol?
First of all, a year ago, the governor as a candidate was very powerful at messages, presenting himself as the West Point graduate and the Special Forces guy, so I think he knows the power of them. Also, a year ago, not just locally but nationally, we were talking about the influence of Grover Norquist and this militant anti-tax message. Does that still have any thrust in the legislature today?
No, I think he's more or less been chased out of town. You know, the very first piece of legislation that the legislature will hear on Monday, it will be in Ways and Means, and it is legislation to repeal the SAVE Act, which was this convoluted scheme that the former Governor Jindal cooked up with the backing of Grover Norquist from Americans with Tax Reform. And essentially, it did a lot of things, but mostly it created a large umbrella of offsets so that lawmakers could raise taxes. There would be these offsets so they could end the session and say, we didn't raise taxes because everything was revenue neutral. So I think an interesting question going forward is, if they do repeal the SAVE Act, which it looks like they will, does that mean that retroactively lawmakers actually did increase taxes in last year's session?
Which most of them admit. It's just really Bobby Jindal who doesn't,
right,
I think.
Right.
I mean, one thing that's interesting is we're seeing some activity out of Americans for Prosperity and some other conservative groups that are kind of national and also local. That's the group associated with the Koch brothers. They put out a poll. Shockingly, people do not want to pay more taxes. Who would have ever thought? Right.
They've also started a digital media buy today that's supposed to be a pretty large buy. It's a series of commercials about the budget. And they also started robocalls during the governor's speech last night.
Now, we know in the Senate the governor's man will be John Valerio.
Always.
Which you could have said 8 years ago.
Whoever was the governor. It's
yeah,
John
it was a
Valerio.
different governor. But where's his leadership going to be in the House?
Well, I think there's a independent speaker that was elected. His name is Taylor Balra. He's working very closely with the House Appropriations Chairman, Cameron Henry. It's the first time that in modern history that there's an independent speaker, there's an independent committee structure. There really is an independent House with their own plan. We've never seen anything like this before. It's uncharted territory. It has me expecting the unexpected this session. But really, I mean, the pressure is on the House in more than one way. I mean, not only do they have to come up with their own plan,
Right.
earn their independence that they have captured, but also they're gonna set the pace for the entire session. You know, the Senate's hands are tied because all tax measures, all budget measures have to start in the House and move to the Senate.
All right, so it begins Sunday, special session.
It begins.
We'll be looking for it. Okay, thanks a lot, both of you guys. All right,
If we
over
can't
now.
have the NFL, we may as well have the
There you go.
legislative
Good
session.
timing, yes.
Right. Jessica, we're talking still more about taxes. The mayor of New Orleans, Mitch Landrieu, is hoping that the voters approve a tax proposal that he's going to put before them, what, in April?
In April. It's due to go to the ballot. And it's actually interesting as all these conversations about taxes from the state come to play. Will people really buy this? I mean, it just kind of seems like this is just one more thing, one more addition. But the tax itself is related to police and fire. It's going to be used, if approved by voters, to boost the number of police officers on the force, to better train them, and also to help the city pay down that $75 million in back pay that it owes to the firefighters. What it'll do is help them pay down their pension amounts that they pay to the firefighters, and then that money will then be free to pay the back pay. And they're hoping that voters will approve it. Landrieu actually spoke before the Bureau of Governmental Research a little while, the same group that actually said a couple years ago that there's actually too many taxes or too much money in the city that's dedicated and cannot be used for these things. And do we really need that money that's sitting in those pools? Do we really need that? And that's what he's trying to get their support in order to get this passed. It
This
seems
is a
as
property
though,
tax.
Yes, these are
So-
property. It's an
property.
increase in property taxes. So how much generally will people have to pay more? It's what, about $100, $200 a year for like a $200,000
Yeah,
house or
around that amount. And it's just interesting, the timing of this. This has been something that he's talked about for a while, but I'd have to say that I think Governor Edwards' plan is kind of raining a little bit on that parade. It just seems as though it would be a little bit too much for voters to ask, while also have to thinking about a penny sales tax, and also have to thinking about raised income taxes next year.
So have you heard of any opposition to this proposal? If you remember about a couple of years ago, when the Audubon Institute tried to change a tax that went before the people, there was a very, very strong campaign launched against it. Are you seeing anything like that or hearing wind of anything like that to oppose
We
this?
haven't heard anything specifically, any groups that have come out specifically to oppose this. I remember when the mayor first announced this, it was on the heels of really a flush year. They were able to give a 15% increase to police officers in pay. They were able to do all sorts of other things. And it seems as though thus far, people have not had this on their radar, but I would guarantee or bet that given the increase that's being proposed at the state level, I mean, you may see a little bit of opposition to this local tax
And
as
they
well.
pick these election days pretty carefully so for low turnout, and they would like it to be low rate.
The conventional wisdom between these kind of property tax proposals is that people who don't own property and who are renters, and this is a community with a high percentage of renters, are less likely to vote against them because they feel like it's a tax on somebody else. The argument against that is, well, yeah, but the increase will be passed on to them, even though they may not feel it when they're sitting at the voting booth. And so that's probably the way to get the message across, to go to the people who don't have to pay it, and get them out and try to get that vote out.
And the mayor is really urging people to approve this because he says the city needs the money. The NOPD is facing a consent decree. It's really expensive to take care of all of the measures that are in the consent decree, to meet them. And then also the firefighters' debt is a big one that the city has to pay.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
And the date of the election again is when?
It'll be in April.
Okey-doke. All right. Thanks a lot, Jessica. All right, we're going to go back over now to Stephanie and talk a little bit more politics. And this time is on the presidential level.
Okay.
And the New Hampshire primary last week.
Mardi Gras primary?
Yeah, the Mardi Gras primary. Actually, maybe sort of has an impact on the Louisiana primary that comes up in March.
A little bit, certainly on the Republican side, because we are starting to see candidates drop off. We're down to 6 on the Republican side, which sounds like a big field, except when you consider how big it was to begin with. We're down to 2, obviously, on the Democratic side. The Louisiana primaries are March 5th. It's a Saturday. It actually follows what people are calling the SEC primary, which is that Tuesday, and it's a bunch of states. It's the first day where you have a bunch of states, some of the SEC states, and also random other states from around the country. So maybe that's a little, not a great label. But what could happen possibly, and what happened on the Democratic side in 2008, the last time we had major primaries, was, there was a lot of voting on, it was Mardi Gras that year, Tuesday, and the feeling was that things would sort themselves out, and we ended up with Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton pretty much at a stalemate. The next thing on the calendar was Louisiana. So we actually got a lot of attention for half a week, basically, between the Tuesday and the Saturday. That's the first time Barack Obama came and did a big event at Tulane, if you remember. It was, huge crowds. He obviously did very well here. What we're looking at, we have a Democrat and Republican primary. Donald Trump was here on Thursday night, the same night that John Bel Edwards gave a speech. And there was a Democratic televised debate, so it was quite the night.
For people who really love politics.
Exactly, yes. My brother called me in the middle of it. I said, I can't talk to you. Politics is happening.
So for these candidates now, as it's sort of coming to shake out, do all of these major candidates have organizations in the state of Louisiana?
All of the remaining ones do. Everybody kind of has a group lined up. Donald Trump has some interesting people with him. The guy who the Republican establishment really kind of doesn't want, one of them anyway. You have Woody Jenkins, who's a little bit of a rebel on the Republican side anyway, kind of a very conservative former legislator. But then you have Eric Skrmetta, who's a public service commissioner, is the other chair, who's kind of more of an establishment Republican. If you look at some of the people who are kind of angling to be his delegates, you have Jay Bath, this former city councilman in New Orleans, very much an establishment figure. Some former legislators, A.G. Crow, John Labruzzo. They're interesting because they're kind of real social conservatives, and Donald Trump isn't. So you think maybe everyone's just kind of, they like something else about him, or maybe they think he's the winner. John Young signed up, which is kind of interesting. And then I would also keep an eye on Ted Cruz, because one thing to remember about Louisiana Republican primaries is, and actually Democratic too, is you can only vote if you are registered in that party. On the Republican side, that means a lot of people who consider themselves Republicans, normally vote Republican, won't be able to vote. So you're really down to kind of a small, very conservative electorate. It's about 20%, 28%.
We have registered
total.
Republicans in the state. How many about?
We have, the totals. Amazingly enough, we have way more registered Democrats than Republicans. 46% Democrat, 28% Republican, 26% non-party. They can't vote in either one. So we tend to skew very conservative in these primaries. Ted Cruz does well with evangelicals. He has Tony Perkins, who is the former state legislator, who's now one of the leaders in the kind of national evangelical political movement. Neil Reiser, Jeb Bush, of course, has a group. He has the old Bush family people, the Bollingers and the Canizaros, and Pat Brister, the St. Tammany Parish president. Rubio's got a good group. He's got some legislators. Rob Kuig, the former mayoral candidate, a couple of pretty high-profile legislators from other parts of the state. Steve Carter from Baton Rouge, Mike Walsworth, Bodie White.
Kasich?
Kasich has a group too. Yep, he's got.
Not one, but came in second. Of course, Trump won the New Hampshire.
He's got a guy.
He's got J.T. Hannon.
J.T. Hannon, who's a local activist.
Scott Sternberg, an attorney.
Norby Chabert. Really, everybody's got a group.
So in having these organizations, are we going to see active campaigning? Are we going to see a lot of ads before the primary, do you think? Will they put much television money here?
Maybe. I think the focus will be on these big states that vote a few days before, but we could get some other visits. Donald Trump, of course, has been going places that other people don't go. He's been to Mississippi, Alabama.
Trump supporters are shopping for a super PAC in Louisiana right now. and they're hoping to have that firmed up by this evening.
And also there are a lot of kind of for-hire political operatives that are signing up with these different groups, which is a sign that we'll have activity.
Okay, so we look for the
yes.
presidential
And
primaries,
of course,
it's on the same day.
It's
for
on
both-
the same day,
both
Democrats
Republican
and
Democrat, which isn't
Republicans.
the case necessarily for every
On
state.
the Democratic side, the feeling is Hillary Clinton should do very well here. She has a track record with minority voters who kind of dominate the Democratic Party here. Bernie Sanders did have a very big rally last year. It was, I have to say, it was big, but it was largely white, and that's not the bulk of the Democratic electorate here. So
And I wonder also how many folks that are signed up that would support Bernie Sanders are actually not signed up for either Democrat or
exactly,
Republican.
or are they kind of
It
free
can't- it
spirits who
doesn't
might be
matter
independent?
anyway.
We don't
Right.
know. Yeah.
Okay, more politics
Yes.
always to keep us amused. Okay,
Yes.
thanks a lot, Stephanie. Errol, well, we have certainly had a good time this Mardi Gras, it would seem. Beautiful weather, great crowds.
Yeah, to me, one of the most amazing things was the cleanup effort. The city's always been good at that, but sometimes it maybe took a couple of days after a big event. But there were a couple of days, there'd be a couple of evenings last week, there'd be a big parade, and like a couple of hours later, you'd be driving down the street and you say, what happened to the parade? I mean, the city did a first-rate sanitation and pickup job, and so that was good. You know, the reputation that New Orleans has for being a dirty city, I think that comes from people who'd come to Mardi Gras in the past, and they see the city the day after Mardi Gras on the way to the airport, and they don't see it 2 days later, right? And so that's their last image. And so they wouldn't have seen that same image this time around, and so I think that was good. As far as crime, there were a couple of shooting incidents along parade routes. Guys just got a gun and fired. It seemed like they were like gang related or some kind of argument. No one was seriously hurt. Arrests were made. And when you're arrested now, that's serious stuff because there's a law with stricter penalties for having a firearm along a parade route. So even if you injure somebody or not, you can be doing some serious time now. I saw Police Chief Harris Mardi Gras night, and he was pleased, and I think he had every right to be pleased. One sort of telling moment was Friday night at Gallier Hall. There was a Dayton Hermes parade in Morpheus. That Mayor Landrieu was there. While they're waiting for the parades, he took the mic that's out on the street, and he introduced, and he says, you know, here's some, state police, here's some local police, and then he introduced a regional agent for the FBI. And I thought, well, this is a strange turn that Mardi Gras has taken, where you introduce the FBI before the parade comes. But when you talk to the people in city government, they're really, they don't hide the fact that they're aware of what happened in San Bernardino and the sort of things that went
Could be a
on.
target.
And so they made a lot of preparations. And we don't know what all preparations were made. I saw some guys standing in front of a police station that looked to me like undercover sort of guys,
Jeff Salad actually pointed out at a recent press conference that they've got more surveillance this year. They had more surveillance this Mardi Gras than they've ever had, and they've used some sort of technology that he couldn't explain to us what it was, but they've used a technology in cameras and are able to better track folks as they're walking down the street. I think his exact words were, assume that we're watching you, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing. So
and there are also
pretty
some
interesting.
places that have just proven to be more likely to have danger along St. Charles, around Jackson Avenue, around that section. The police know that is a dangerous spot. The people who create the danger don't know that the police know that. Right? And so I suspect that there's a lot of monitoring that was going there. Economically, hotels were down. One hotel I know said they thought they were about 80%, perhaps more than that. And then as far as the Advocate reported that emergency calls were up, but nothing really major. But by all of the kind of measures, I think things went well.
It was a good Mardi Gras, and also this leads us into Jessica because there were more parking tickets allegedly written this year
There were
than
more
in years
parking
past.
tickets. I believe it was around 32,000 that were written, and last year there were about 23,000, and that comes on the heels of the last steps of the City Council's parking meter, or Landrieu's parking meter compromise,
Right.
which basically said that we will raise the parking meter rates double it in the French Quarter and in the Central Business District, and raise it by 50 cents elsewhere, only from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. in exchange for you allowing us to hike the parking ticket prices from $20 at minimum to $30 at minimum. So may have been a little bit of an incentive for folks to get out there and write a few more tickets.
More tickets. So once again, I'm going to have you just sort of review that so that everybody understands now, if you get a parking ticket, this is what it's going to cost you and when you could be ticketed. So the mayor, as I recall, had wanted to extend it to 10 p.m., from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. He didn't get his way. So what is it now?
He didn't. It's actually from 8 a.m. to 7, and that's a change from what it used to be, which was 8 a.m. to 6, Monday through Saturday. So it's an additional hour instead of an additional 4 hours, which is what he wanted. And altogether, that's expected to raise about $4.9 million in additional revenue for the city.
And then the rates also, it costs more to park in the French Quarter and
in the Central
and
Business,
CBD?
in the CBD, warehouse, Marigny area, that general area that's before or right around the downtown sphere. And I think that what they tried to do in doing that was give a little bit of a compromise. I remember at first there was talk of 50 cents everywhere. Let's do that, because if we do this, as you've suggested, it will really hurt the service industry workers that come down to the quarter and that rely on these meters,
Right.
Especially late at night when RTA service is not at its best. And in exchange for that, they actually came up with a compromise that would say, well, we're going to keep the rates as is. We're not going to give you 50 cents across the board, which was what you wanted, but we're only going to do it for an hour. We're going to increase the parking ticket violations, and we're also going to charge the film crews and other construction companies that block off city streets more when they want to do that. We're going to raise the rates on them so that we don't have to raise them on you. And that was what was brought forth, and they've moved forward with that, and we've seen increased ticket revenue as a result just in this Mardi Gras season.
And all of these new changes, they were going to be moving into effect after Mardi Gras, right? Is that correct?
The changes we were told that the changes would be moving into effect as soon as they can be effectively implemented when it comes down to the parking ticket hikes. When it comes down to the parking meters, that was in effect already in effect in January.
So you're paying more already. Real quick, Errol?
I would argue, this is Errol's theory, that if a city creates an event that creates more of a demand for parking spots, that the city's response should be more compassion for the people who have the automobiles, rather than using it as a Super Bowl for ticket riding. And we're not talking about blatant things like blocking driveways. We're talking about like things like parking 15 feet from the curb rather than 20 feet.
There's
they make a
probably
lot of money. They create the events and they make a lot of money off of them.
A lot of folks who would agree with you. Looking ahead.
B.B. King's club is coming into New Orleans. It's opening at March 9th, and it's going to be where Jimmy Buffett's was on Decatur Street. And it's been a very successful operation in Memphis, and this is going to be one of its really prestige locations.
Okay, thanks, Errol. Jeremy.
John Bell Edwards, the first governor ever elected directly from the House, will give his first session address Sunday afternoon in the House.
Okay, we'll look for that.
The City Council has actually hinted that they will be taking up a lot of the things that had been deferred before Mardi Gras, perhaps after Mardi Gras. So we may see the marijuana, the decriminalization of that, the ordinance that was sponsored by Susan Guidry, come up again at the next couple of council meetings. So we'll be looking forward to that.
Okay.
Okay. Up in Washington, they have the budget process too, and the Obama administration has again kind of has its eye on that revenue sharing that Mary Landrieu won years ago, and is really about to kick in a big way. Big pot of money. The administration has some other ideas for it. The delegation's very much against it. I guess the good news for us in this case is Obama's not going to get anything out of this Congress, so we're probably safe.
Okay.
Keep an eye on it.
Thanks, you guys, for being here. Thank you all for watching us, and we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.